Les États-Unis viennent de demander à 35 pays de choisir leur camp et une vingtaine ont déjà signé. Nvidia a réduit de moitié sa garantie pour le centre de données d'OpenAI dans l'Ohio de 250 milliards de dollars à moins de 120. Et OpenAI a discrètement dissous l'équipe chargée de déterminer si ses propres modèles présentaient un risque catastrophique. Bienvenue dans votre résumé quotidien. Je suis votre hôte, Étienne Noumen, ingénieur professionnel et fondateur de Jamgamind depuis Calgary, en Alberta, au Canada. Aujourd'hui, lundi 17 août 2026, nous examinons le jour où l'intelligence artificielle a cessé d'être un sujet technologique pour devenir un sujet de souveraineté. Commençons par la lettre. Le département d'État fait circuler un cadre appelé Pax Silica auprès de 35 pays partenaires. Si vous signez, vous obtenez un accès aux investissements partagés dans les projets d'IA, des projets conjoints et des contrôles à l'exportation coordonnée sur les modèles, les semiconducteurs et les minéraux critiques. Si vous rejoignez plutôt l'alternative chinoise, vous êtes exclu. La phrase clé est la suivante: faire partie de tout, c'est ne faire partie de rien. Le Japon, l'Australie et la Corée du Sud ont adhéré. Le Kazakhstan a signé les deux, ce qui a inquiété Washington sans entraîner la moindre sanction car le cadre n'a explicitement aucune valeur contraignante. La structure concurrente annoncée par Xi Jinping en juillet n'offre pas d'accès à l'investissement. Elle offre des modèles que l'on peut télécharger. L'argent, lui, est devenu plus prudent. Nvidia réduit sa garantie pour le campus d'OpenAI dans l'Ohio de 250 milliards de dollars à moins de 120, après que ses investisseurs se sont inquiétés du risque encouru. Le même jour, Jensen Huang annonçait le site PortSpike à Portsmouth, dans l'Ohio, avec OpenAI comme locataire, 4,25 gigawatts, qu'il évalue à 150 à 200 milliards de dollars de revenus pour Nvidia par génération sur 20 ans. Sa formule était directe. Dans l'économie de l'IA, le calcul, c'est le revenu. Vient ensuite la question de la confiance. Dario Amodei a rompu son silence sur X pour rejeter l'idée que ses avertissements sur la sécurité se seraient retournés contre lui, qualifiant la méfiance du public de crise de confiance dont il n'est pas l'auteur et affirmant que seules de véritables percées médicales feront changer l'opinion. David Sachs lui a répondu point par point, qualifiant l'examen fédéral préalable au déploiement proposé par Amodei de préfecture de l'IA. Et au milieu de ce débat, nous avons appris qu'OpenAI avait dissous son équipe de préparation à la fin juillet, répartissant l'évaluation des risques catastrophiques entre d'autres services avant son introduction en bourse, quelques semaines après que ses propres modèles en préversion ont compromis Hugging Face sans aucune intervention humaine. Avant de décortiquer la télémétrie de ces événements, les algorithmes de votre plateforme de podcast ne nous recommandent que si vous interagissez. Pour ne jamais manquer nos analyses quotidiennes, veuillez cliquer sur Suivre ou vous abonner à la chaîne sur Apple Podcast pour écouter sans aucune publicité. Décortiquons les données.
Let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm your host, and today we're putting on our forensic venture strategist hats to conduct a clinical, systemic autopsy of the AI landscape as it stands today, Monday, August 17th, 2026. Before we get going, a quick note on the credits. This Explainer is researched and produced by Étienne Noumen, professional engineer and founder at Jamgamind, out of Calgary, Alberta in Canada. Now, today, we aren't just looking at a random list of news items, we're dissecting one massive, interconnected argument about sovereignty, the shrinking financial backstop, and the total collapse of public trust.
Here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start way up at the macro level with the geopolitics of sovereignty, then drill down into the physical infrastructure constraints. From there, we'll track the consolidation of the tech stack, the literal physical cost of training data, and finally, arrive at the foundational layer, the collapse of societal trust. Let's see how all these pieces fit together.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the geopolitics of sovereignty. We're looking directly at the state-level battle for dominance right now.
What we're watching unfold is the world essentially being forced to pick a side. On one hand, you've got the US State Department actively pressing 35 partner nations to align their AI infrastructure under a framework called Pax Silica. The deal is, if you align, you get the perks: shared investment opportunities, joint projects, and heavily coordinated export controls across semiconductors and critical minerals. But on the other side, you've got China's WICO structure, the World Artificial Intelligence Cooperation Organization. Now, China isn't offering shared investment access. Instead, they're offering something much more immediate: highly capable, open-source models that you can just go ahead and download.
And this brilliantly captures the diplomatic pressure at play. To be part of everything is to be part of nothing. That's the operative line from the draft letter the U.S. State Department sent to those 35 nations. It's a very explicit warning. If you join China's alternative, you're getting locked out of the U.S. ecosystem. Now, roughly 24 nations have already signed on to Pax Silica, including heavyweights like Japan, Australia, and South Korea. But here's the fascinating part. Kazakhstan signed both. Because Pax Silica is technically non-binding, it absolutely caused alarm in Washington, but Kazakhstan faced 0 stated penalties. As analysts, this tells us that right now, these diplomatic fences are highly permeable.
To really grasp why a sovereign nation might be so tempted by China's offer, you just have to look at this number, 3 billion. That's the number of downloads Alibaba's QN model family racked up in a mere 6 months, totally outpacing Meta and Google. Alibaba is now hosting over 460 open-source models, which have spawned hundreds of thousands of derivatives. It firmly establishes the massive scale and magnetic appeal of China's open-weight reality. You don't have to spend billions building the infrastructure from scratch. You literally just download the weights.
Which brings us perfectly to our next layer, Section 2, Infrastructure Constraints. Because if you aren't downloading open models, you have to physically build the massive hardware to run them. Jensen Huang recently framed the future of this entire industry with this exact phrase: "In the AI economy, compute is revenue." Nvidia is currently partnering up with SB Energy to build an absolutely massive 4.25 gigawatt site in Portsmouth, Ohio, specifically with OpenAI as the tenant. Huang is projecting that the total OpenAI opportunity through 2030 could be roughly $600 billion. He envisions pulling in up to $200 billion in Nvidia revenue per generation over a 20-year term. Those are staggering numbers, but enormous projections come with immense unavoidable risks. And here is where it gets incredibly interesting. Look at the stark contrast between those original proposals and the revised reality. On the exact same day, Huang is talking about these massive revenue streams, Nvidia aggressively scales back the financial guarantee it proposed for that very same Ohio data center. They slashed it from $250 billion down to under $120 billion. Why the sudden drop? Because investors raised major red flags about the risk exposure tied to such astronomical financing commitments. The pool of capital is vast, sure, but it's not infinite, and that financial backstop is rapidly shrinking. So the crucial takeaway here is that when capital requirements reach these stratospheric levels, only the absolute biggest players can survive. That forces us right into Section 3, consolidation of the stack.
Let's clinically walk through the sheer scale of the M&A activity happening right under our noses. Stripe just finalized its acquisition of OpenRouter for over $7 billion. OpenRouter essentially routes developer requests across hundreds of different AI models. So why the massive price tag? Well, they had a $1.3 billion valuation just this past May, but their token traffic skyrocketed from 5 trillion to 25 trillion weekly tokens in just 6 months. Stripe is aggressively moving from payments directly into the plumbing of AI infrastructure. Then you've got SpaceX closing a staggering $60 billion acquisition of the coding startup Cursor. They're adding it straight into Elon Musk's portfolio alongside xAI and X to consolidate aerospace coding. The entire stack is consolidating at breakneck speed.
But as the infrastructure consolidates, so does the insatiable hunger for data. Let's shift our focus from financial capital down to the very physical, real-world extraction of that data. Section 4, the cost of training data. If you were to track an air tag into an Amazon VGT3 warehouse today, you'd uncover a fairly brutal procedural supply chain designed to train their Nova models. Workers are bulk buying rare physical books, and they are literally chopping off the spines to speed up the scanning process, all to digitize them for AI training. And the crazy part? There is legal precedent driving this exact logic. A recent lawsuit revealed that Anthropic ran a similar operation called Project Panama, and a judge actually ruled that scanning those books qualified as fair use, partly because the physical originals were destroyed in the process as a form of legal shielding. We are quite literally shredding history to train the future. Which naturally leads us to our final and perhaps most volatile layer of the day. How does the public actually perceive these systems? Welcome to Section 5, the collapse of trust. Right now, we're watching an intense ideological battle play out publicly over how these frontier models should be managed. On one side, you have Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. He argues that AI is facing a severe crisis of trust, one that can only be solved by delivering real-world breakthroughs, like actually curing cancer. He's actively advocating for pre-deployment federal reviews of frontier models. But in response, you have investor David Sachs labeling Amodei's proposal a DMV for AI.
Sachs argues this is nothing more than regulatory capture, a calculated way to create long queues, handicap the US against China, and protect Anthropic's pricing advantages against those open-source models we talked about earlier. It's a fundamental, highly polarized debate over whether safety protocols are genuine necessities or just strategic moats.
To actively combat this massive deficit of trust, Anthropic just published the technical mechanism behind their global text watermark for Claude, and honestly, it is fascinating engineering. It modifies the source of randomness in Claude's word selection, and it's completely invisible to readers. It adds 0 hidden characters, and it's detectable only if you have the specific decryption key. Best of all, it has 0 practical cost impact. It doesn't generate any extra tokens. Furthermore, it's designed so that absolutely nothing in the watermark can be used to recover user or organization information. For an industry staring down a total collapse of public trust, this is essentially the holy grail. Real accountability without a performance tax.
But you have to juxtapose Anthropic's big safety push with what's happening simultaneously over at OpenAI. OpenAI just dissolved its preparedness team, the exact group tasked with evaluating the catastrophic risks of frontier models. Sam Altman specifically directed staff to cut what he called side quests to ruthlessly prioritize ChatGPT and streamline their operations ahead of a planned IPO. Keep in mind, this follows the previous dissolution of both their super alignment and AGR readiness teams. We are watching safety teams get systematically absorbed or outright cut in the name of corporate streamlining and rapid product delivery.
And that brings us to our final point, weaving all of this into one ultimate question. We've seen nations drawing hard geopolitical lines in the sand. We've seen billion-dollar infrastructure guarantees suddenly slashed in half due to acute investor anxiety. We've seen physical books destroyed to feed the data machine, and we've seen safety teams systematically dismantled in the march toward an IPO. So I'd leave you with this thought to mull over. When sovereignty is strictly demanded, when capital is suddenly constrained, and when public trust is completely dissolved, who actually underwrites the next generation of AI? Thank you for joining me for today's Explainer. I hope this systemic autopsy has given you a clearer, more clinical view of the landscape. Until next time, keep analyzing.